anybody who's casting a vote for Trump in 2024 is revealing something very important about themselves. I just decided, well, let's take the consequences I set in place for family, take that one step further, because it needs to go further.
Your punishment must be more severe.
It needs to be applied to everyone, and it also needs to be, more permanent. The distancing is not just for a few months. It's going to be kind of just forever.
Anyone who's voting for Trump, you're just cutting out of life entirely. If you personally had to steel man the Trump argument, like, why do you think people are voting for Trump in your most generous interpretation? Elon Musk and RFK Jr., who are two of the country's most prominent liberals, have joined forces with Trump. What do you think that says about the Democratic establishment?
That he's just simply a dangerous person, a demagogue, uses authoritarianism and fascism for its self-advantage.
I would view your method of cutting off people as maybe too extreme, because it's not like Trump is running against Gandhi, but here you have two objectively awful people who have not just done awful things in theory, but like have actually done awful things and harmed a lot of people.
They don't care if their fellow citizens are arrested or assassinated. They don't care if the government is overthrown and we have a president for life who is not held accountable by the law.
Our mom would probably say, oh, he's going to cut people out who vote for Trump. Like, I don't want to cause problems. I'm just not going to vote. I have a harder time seeing our dad reacting well to being forced to do or not do something. I don't understand how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are just walking around free in society and not in prison, locked in a cell, like throw away the key, just like Trump. Let's throw them all in prison. That would make me very happy. So we're recording. I am Andrew. This is David. Oh, you can't see me.
David.
We are related, if it's not apparent. This is my brother, and I've got two brothers. He's my oldest brother, and you're getting married in May next year.
May, yep.
Exciting. And other than that, we haven't even sent it in the family group text, but we found out baby number 3 is a boy this week.
Oh, that's exciting. Nice. That's
exciting. We'll be even with our sister has two girls and one boy, and we'll have 2 boys and 1 girl. So it'll be balanced out. And so, yeah, we are talking about, of course, the election. There's an event coming up in approximately a month that some people may have heard about, And so why don't you share just like a spark notes of your I don't know what you'd call it, your thing that you're doing.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the gist of it is that I've been, paying more attention to politics over the last 10 years, basically since the 2016 election. Just, I guess before that, it was, politics was more distant. I just didn't pay as much attention. Looking back, I guess there wasn't as much need to, because it was standard politics. But since the 2016 election, since Trump took office, it's been very non-standard. It's been, lots of concerning, obviously there's always going to be policy disagreements, even if for a candidate you support, like there's going to be some policies that they do that you don't necessarily always agree with, and that's okay. But this is a far more foundational. It's not just policies with Trump. It's it's more, I guess, just everything: character, integrity, the tools he uses to kind of rile people up, promote violence, and use that violence for his advantage, to maintain political power, stuff like that. Things that are, as kind of through these last 10 years, paying attention, that kind of political scholars, psychologists, all these people are breaking, golden rules of, don't assess somebody who you haven't personally sat down with to, form of an opinion about, like an actual, client patient, or a patient provider relationship. That's kind of the golden rule of psychology. Don't just armchair look at somebody famous and give an assessment of them. You should sit down with them. But, people have broken that mold because they see how dangerous he is, that people need to be warned from kind of all aspects, that he's just simply a very dangerous person, a demagogue, uses authoritarianism and fascism, to, for its self-advantage. And so kind of seeing that over the last 10 years, I've decided that, that's a real problem, as have lots of other people. But my approach of what to do about it is probably a bit more extreme. So, I mean, like I said, 2016 election, things looked, it's like, okay, here's just kind of a guy who's on a personal level, a bad human being, greedy, arrogant, impulsive, kind of lots of signs that he just wouldn't be a good person. Obviously, he was unqualified for the position, which is one of the big appeals among the Republican base. He's not a politician. He's from outside the system, which, okay, sure, try something different. But there's, I don't know, that's just all, I don't know. I guess the 2016 election was, I personally saw him as just a not good candidate. Nothing terribly wrong. It's like, what could be the worst that happens type thing. And then a lot of bad stuff happened. And so, like I said, then I paid pretty good attention during his administration, just kind of what was going on, like from both. Obviously, there's outside critics, but then also internally, his own, not just base, but his supporters, but all the leadership, his administration, stuff like that. People who started to drop out, started to criticize him and get cut off for it. Kind of this thing, seeing the snowball start to happen. And so because of that, the 2020 election. I just the ineptness and the actual corruption, stuff like that. I wrote a big paper about it, and I made another video kind of at least mentioning that. It was a very long and detailed and cited paper, just trying to give an idea of who Trump is overall as a human being in his political role, stuff like that, up through 2020. Has not been updated since then, since there's just been so much happening, and I've just been, it's overwhelming to try to update something like that.
Which is why this time you've made a video that we'll put a link to, because it's nothing. I definitely skimmed through that paper, but it's nothing personal, because I just don't read with my eyeballs anymore. Yeah. Ever since the pandemic, our other brother converted me to audiobooks and podcasts and stuff, so I have not read a book with my eyeballs in 4 years. And so I think people will definitely listen to your video, but carry on.
Yes. No, yeah, no, I agree with that formatting wise. Like it's, writing is a very good to have, thorough and clear, not, stumbling with words, and you actually there, oh, you're reading, there's the actual citation, stuff like that. It's got some advantages, but yeah, video definitely has other advantages. It's just, I don't know, I guess a more practical medium for most people to sit and watch a video than sit and read a 27-page paper. So but yeah, so then for the 2020 election, I did write that, tried to post it for people to see, and then I just emailed or I guess group message just our family, immediate family and extended family, just saying, hey, here's all the reasons. This is not just standard political differences based on policies. This is actually a big deal. This is foundational, erosion of, democratic ideas, the foundations of what America are. It's, everybody's supposed to be held equally to the law. There is supposed to be a law to begin with, rather than, there being disdain for the law and oh, let's just completely throw away the Constitution so that I can do whatever I want. Mindset that Trump has. So I, just messaged just family saying, hey, this isn't okay. This is dangerous. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm just telling you who you should, one candidate you should not vote for, which of course was Trump, for all these detailed good reasons. And yeah, and basically for anybody who does vote for Trump, then at least for the first 4 months of 2021, I'll just distance, you and I, whoever votes. Just kind of, I guess a grounding is what I would call it, to hold somebody accountable. Trying to provide motivation in the first place, All right, you kind of have to choose between your your political party on one hand, and or basically your family on the other, um, because currently MAGA is not compatible with family or with general society or with legality, within stability, everything. It's authoritarianism, fascism. So I kind of messaged the family about that. Um, Predictably, lots of people didn't understand why it was happening. They didn't see it as such a big deal, which of course sometimes, I mean, I understand if you aren't paying attention to something. If you don't know about something in the first place, then when consequences naturally happen because of that, it can seem to be coming out of left field. And you're like, well, why is this happening? Um, but then again, that's why I tried to provide the good foundation, the paper explaining it. I've done, lots of political posts, individual interactions with family and other people. And so that was the 2020 election. And then since then, of course, there's been a whole lot more that's come out that was more behind the scenes stuff during Trump's administration to show that I mean, not just what he did during office, but ideas he's promoted since then, again, that are, extremely dangerous. It's not just a difference in political party or political policy platform. Um, he's just an actual extremely dangerous individual who should not hold any position of power. He's obviously exploiting that for his own personal gain at the expense of a country. So then because of that, I mean, I just decided, well, let's take the consequences I set in place for family in 2020 and take that one step further, because it needs to go further. It needs to be applied to everyone, not just my family. And it also needs to be, more permanent. After 10 years now, nearly, of, Trump having started the campaign trail and all that's happened since then, if people aren't paying attention or don't care what's happening or see what's happening and want it to happen, especially in that group, why would I want to associate with that person? That person is not just promoting different ideology or political platform. They're just advocating the destruction of the current political, foundations, and either want that to happen or don't realize it's going to happen. And so that was just kind of the theme of the video that I put together and that you're editing for me, of just saying, okay, now these consequences are permanent. The distancing is not just for a few months. It's going to be kind of just forever. Like it's I guess people have anybody who's casting a vote for Trump in 2024 is revealing something very important about themselves. It's less, I mean, obviously I and many other citizens and many other world leaders and people around the world do not want Trump to win because they realize how dangerous he is. But I had a brain fart and now I forgot where I was going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good spark note of like, that's the new for 2024 election.
Right.
Like anyone who's voting for Trump, you're just cutting out of life entirely. And it's not something that affects me personally too much because there's no universe for me where I would vote for Trump. And so this isn't a right debate in the sense of left versus right, because I think we have some differences of opinions and we can talk through those, but it's not like a Republican versus a Democrat or something like that. And yeah, because I think for me personally, whoever wins, I'll be disappointed in America either way. Of just like, this is where we're at, and I do think politics is important, like you're saying, and it increasingly becomes more and more so. I still do think that it's overranked in most people's, maybe not most people's, but a lot of people's priorities. As far as if you put half the energy you put into researching politics and news stories and put that into like being a better friend or husband or dad or friend, well, whatever, the world would probably be a lot better. Not to say that you can't invest in those things. But I'm speaking from personal experience too. If I get really into something and it's like, oh, maybe I should be hanging out with my kids instead of getting upset at this video I'm watching on my phone and that kind of thing. And so I wrote a few notes down.
Yeah.
Let's see. Um so yeah, I had questions of like, for one, would you differentiate between Trump voters and Trump supporters? Because obviously there's like the Trump supporters at rallies that are like, MAGA, lock her up, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people who are like, Trump, I think he's pretty awful too, but I just happen to agree more with his policies, even though he's a bad person. And so I'll kind of hold my nose and vote for him. Like, do you differentiate between those kinds of people?
I mean, there's certainly a difference in mindset, but there is no difference in outcome. So I guess an analogy, I like to use analogies just to help explain better. But I guess it's a more a personal analogy, a story that you told me. This would have happened, I guess, a couple years ago. That you and your family went over to one of your friends' houses. Wife and kids. I think your son was what, maybe he's maybe 2, 3 at the time. I can't quite remember. How old is he? He's right now 4 or 5
He's
or
4.5.
yeah. So he would have been about 2.5 at the time. And you said that while you guys were over there, he was just playing and then got a hold of the owner's, your friend's firearm. You found him playing with it. That is not a minor oopsie. Like that's that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed.
It's not like oops, I left a can of soda out and my kid drank a little bit of it and he wasn't supposed to have sugar or something like that. That's a completely different ballpark of a mistake. Completely different gravity of outcomes that could happen. So and thankfully nothing bad happened. Thank God. But
I totally forgot about that, and you just talking about it's like already making my blood boil.
good. It should because that's like I said, that's not a small thing. But imagine in response to that, your friend saying, "Oh, well, I'm not really that into gun safety and my life is just so busy. I don't really have time to, research how to properly store firearms around my house or, I really don't think it's that big of a deal if, kids get their hands on firearms." Is that the case? Okay, well then you shouldn't own a fucking gun. Like that's just flat out baseline. Like if you're not going to be responsible with something like that, you just shouldn't do it. Shouldn't have a firearm if you're unwilling to secure it, especially around children. So in that case, I bet that in the moment you felt very unsafe for your son. I don't know all the details of what came out of it, but that's some mistakes you don't come back from. They can't be undone. And it's if the worst did happen and your friend was like, I'm so sorry that your son blew his brains out. Let me take you out for a beer and to apologize. This is all like the person is completely not understanding the gravity of the situation of what happened. And so, I mean, obviously in a case, if somebody was intentionally doing that, be like, "Ooh, yeah, I hope I'm going to leave these guns around. And I hope that, that a kid gets their hands on it and hurts themselves or others." Okay. That's malicious intent. That's obviously worse than accidental, but even accidentally, negligently leaving it out still could have the same consequence of the kid, hurting themselves or others or killing themselves or others. So that's basically what's happening with the current election with Trump running. Anybody who intentionally is supporting him, Trump supporters, yes, that's a totally different mindset. That would be the gung ho. Oh, I don't care. I hope a kid gets a hold of this gun and hurts themselves. They would fall in that gravity of seeing what's happening, wanting it to happen. Whereas people who are just voting for him out of I disagree. I think he's a bad person, but I'm gonna vote for him anyway because I don't I'm like the policy's better. That's negligence. That's seeing what's happening, not caring about the consequences. Because again, policies don't matter here. Policies are completely irrelevant for the 2024 election. It doesn't matter who you agree with on what policy, it's irrelevant. What matters is who is going to preserve, the foundations of what a democracy is, and who is going to overthrow it to try and establish an authoritarian theocratic state. That is absolutely, that's the difference in gravity. We're not talking about a difference in taxation or border security or anything like that. This is far more foundational. That Trump, as I explained in the other video I made, gave citations. He explicitly wants to be president for life. He wants the Constitution to be suspended in his favor. He wants to be able to assassinate his political opponents or just arrest them and keep them in jail. He wants all of these things that we see in, extreme states, extreme, Russia, China, North Korea, these types of authoritarian states, because he is an authoritarian.
Yeah. So that, I'd have to sit and sort of think through that analogy, because it may or may not be parallel. Because in my mind, sometimes voting I would think of more as how we shop. Like there's people who might say, "Oh, you shop at this store, so you're supporting genocide," and that's a really slippery slope, because then it's like, well, if you're driving, you're using oil from the Middle East that may have been from some oil war, and because shopping is for most people a fairly insignificant thing, and I think most people view voting as a fairly insignificant thing.
I think so too.
People who go in and they just say, "Oh, here's my options. I haven't thought about this in a few months, and now I'm supposed to do this thing," and I just do it and go home and see what the results are. So I don't know if it's an apt analogy, compared to someone who's really not even campaigning for a candidate, but just is telling all their friends and has all the stickers and is making all the Facebook posts and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's I don't know. Again, I'd have to think through that more. But if you personally had to steel man the Trump argument, like why do you think people are voting for Trump in like the most generous in your most generous interpretation?
Well, I mean, I think like you said, historically, voting has been kind of an insignificant thing. I agree with that. Like there hasn't been as much of a divide between parties in the past, so it's kind of like very minor differences, decades past. But we're to the point where the break between parties is so significant that there is. I mean, it has become a very significant thing, not insignificant. And I think that people have not realized that yet. They're still in the mindset, like you said, like, oh, the voting is rather inconsequential. They have in their mind certain policies. Obviously, everybody has their policies that people support, and so which tend to be associated with left or right wing. And so I think that the main thing is that people who are voting for Trump, not non-Trump supporters, not all out people who are just maybe agree with right-wing leaning policies more so, are voting for Trump simply because they don't realize the gravity of what is happening. Kind of like somebody who doesn't realize the gravity of leaving a gun laying around, thinking it's not just that big of a deal. It's like, oh, I use firearms all the time, like I keep it safe, and then not realizing kids don't know that, like that's I feel like it's mostly just like I said, people's lives are busy. They don't pay attention to the stuff because they're with family, friends. They've got work. They've got so much going on that they don't have time to pay attention, detailed attention to what's happening on a political level. And that's because in the past there's been no need to. It's been relatively minor and insignificant. Things have significantly changed. People don't realize it, and they're just out of habit going along with, well, this is the party I've historically supported. I'm going to keep supporting it because I disagree with the other side's policies, which again, normal situations, that's totally fine. But this is not a normal situation. Policies don't matter. It's the foundational aspect of how much of a threat Donald Trump is to an actual democracy, because he wants to, as he's said, wants to overthrow things that him and his leadership, we're not just talking about random people in society or on the internet, people who he's surrounded himself with in his cabinet, his political party, are saying they want to overthrow the government. And that's very dangerous, obviously. And I don't think people have realized that.
Yeah, and I can get into a few things of some serious issues I might take with the Democratic Party or the Biden-Harris campaign or presidency even. And but first, what would you say? What do you see as if you're? I know it's kind of impossible to do, but if you're to just set aside that Donald Trump doesn't exist and that part of your brain has gone, and you're just thinking about the Biden-Harris administration and now the current campaign, what would you say are the potential dangers of how that could be bad for people, for America overall?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, again, there's a difference between foundational. I haven't seen anything from either the Democratic Party, Libertarian Party, whatever, any disdain for the law, like foundational, disdain for it. Sure, there's maybe policy disagreements, but even looking back at the Republican Party itself, back in the back during the Obama administration and before, like there wasn't any significant disdain for the law. People were still at least respectful of it. So I currently don't. I mean, I have not yet seen anything that would be considered dangerous. Policy disagreements, sure. But I don't know. Maybe you could give an example or some examples for context of what you think are not just a common or I don't know, a disagreement about something versus this is actually a bad thing. Like what would be an example of that?
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me because the pretty much all the things you say about Trump, I might think, oh, that might be a little overstated, but it's like pretty much true, pretty much accurate. He is a terrible person. He's a total narcissist. He's, I do think, not good for society or the government or all that kind of thing. But then I think very similar things about, we'll just say Kamala Harris right now since she's the front runner. But so some prime examples, I wrote down several, but because in my mind, it's like, where do you even start? Because for one, the free speech, again, is a very foundational view of the United States. And oddly enough, the Democratic Party, there are several things that seem to have flip-flopped in the parties, or not necessarily flip-flop between the two because one might have stayed the same, but like the Republicans used to be or we'll say the Democrats used to be the anti-war, anti-big pharma, anti-censorship, anti several other things, and now they're very pro big pharma, pro big business, pro and tech companies, pro war, pro censorship, and that's happened only in the past 20 years, where you have Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris, which is just the wildest turn of events. Who's Donald Trump is a bad person, but Dick Cheney is like an evil person, like the head of the military-industrial complex, basically, who just wants war and violence and money. And he's endorsing Kamala because, ironically, Trump is more, wants to cut off aid to Ukraine, and whereas Kamala even bragged in the debate that she called off the peace deal, went over there and negotiated because they had this peace deal with Russia and Ukraine. She said, no, that's not going to be good for foreign diplomacy and all this. Like, we got to keep the war rolling. And that plays into inflation and the, cost of living, which again, this kind of touches a lot of things, but because I want to focus more on there's all the little policies around it, but like you're saying, the foundational undermining of America. And so there was lots of censorship during the pandemic and beyond, not just about the pandemic topics. That was a big thing, but you weren't even allowed there was actual shutdowns of the government and of meetings and organizations that were totally unnecessary, a ways into the pandemic. Obviously, I'm not like a oh, it never happened. It was all a pandemic and there's microchips in the vaccine. But, within 3 or 4 months of the pandemic, by the end of the summer in 2020, everyone knew what COVID was, who it affected. It was people who were older, who had, I forget the terms now, more comorbidities had underlying conditions, and yet we shut down the whole country perpetually for nearly 2 years. And that obviously created a huge economic turmoil and a lot of problems, especially with children not being in school and not being socialized. And Trump, the closest thing you get to, you would never get an apology from Trump, but he at least says that, oh, in 2020, when I was running again, like I was sort of steamrolled by my bureaucrats and they wouldn't let me unlock things, but he at least thought that it should have been unlocked, whereas the Biden-Harris campaign was very about, nope, we're going to shut down everything. We're going to impose these strict penalties, and it's frightening when you see like Canada is just north of us, and they shut down people's bank accounts who protested COVID lockdowns, and that's dystopian novel type stuff.
Mhm.
And not to say that things were quite that extreme here in the U.S. in the same way that censorship in Canada or the UK, which are just very, a little too close to home to the US, have gotten very, like, I looked this up last night to make sure it was accurate, but there were more than 10 times the arrests over free speech and social media posts in the UK than there were in Russia. And which is wild that the laws have gotten so strict. And I one example, just to give an example of like how these things work, but there's a lady named Chelsea Russell in the UK, and she had a friend pass in a car accident, I think, and she posted her friend's favorite song lyrics on Facebook, and I think it was a rap song, and it included the N-word. She was arrested and prosecuted and like went to jail because of that, because of hate speech laws in the UK. And I think most people, you would hope, would say that's ridiculous, but yet there's this legal system that's making this happen, and people behind that. And the same is very similar in the US, and becoming increasingly so, to where Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz have both said that Americans have the right to free speech, but not the right to, speaking misinformation. I think like that's misinformation can just be, speech you don't like. Like free speech is for, the things that you don't agree with, unless it's, yelling fire in a crowded theater, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But so in my mind, like, that just not believing in free speech not only makes you ineligible to run for the presidency, but like you're ineligible to be a citizen of this country. And I still don't understand why that's not being. I mean, it has been in the news, but that's one major issue. There's others among those, but I don't know. Have you seen any of that or experienced any of that or heard from friends or in your own experience?
No, I mean, I do remember. I mean, obviously during pandemic era, there was, um, I guess you would say censorship of misinformation, or difference of opinion, something like that. So I guess there's a couple things about how you go about that. Like, I guess just starting broad level, we're probably on the same page. Like we just on a regardless of administration or country or time period, that it's do you think it's the responsibility of a government to promote false information that's misleading or harmful to citizens? Like broad idea. Like we'd probably say no. Like it shouldn't just be putting out lies, which then implies the opposite is true. It should provide accurate information.
Hmm.
Of course, the debate is, how that's approached, and what the accurate information is, but it's kind of a foundational thing, like just an effective, transparent government, provides accurate information. And we're in hurricane season right now, so it's like if there was a hurricane that was predicted, like NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, whatever. If they had all their data saying, all right, look, the hurricane's forming out in the Atlantic. It's looking like it's going to loop up, Florida and then go up the East Coast. But then you have, separate people saying, you know what, I just don't really think that. I think it's going to go up through the Gulf and just go through the Midwest states. and I don't really trust NOAA, and we got to think about weather differently, and but having no, I guess, direct, um I don't know, no direct way to discredit NOAA's information data showing something else. It would at that point kind of be the responsibility of the government to at least say, promote, label that as misinformation, that it's going to go through the Midwest, because that's not just a difference of mindset. That's it can have huge impacts on where's aid going to be directed, who should be expected to evacuate, like all these sort of things. It has real world impacts that would not happen, depending on where the hurricane is going to go. Um, so in something like the pandemic, this was the first time in 100 years that there's been a major global pandemic. There wasn't, there was no playbook for anybody to take. They just had to, in obviously in the Trump administration, the government itself, there was split. Trump, didn't think it was a big deal, refused to wear a mask for months on end, that sort of stuff. Just promoting his idea of strength around in the face of a pandemic. Whereas it's like CDC was obviously completely at odds with that, because they were starting to get data. They've had historical data of how to handle diseases. That's their specialty, obviously. So then they're providing conservative, ironically, they're providing conservative recommendations about what to shut down, when is safe, how to clean stuff, all this sort of stuff. And then, just like Trump was in administration, he took a much more anarchist view. Like, no, let's, not shut things down. This isn't that big of a deal. Like, people who are promoting, unverified, solutions, or treatments, I guess, stuff like that. Like, okay, maybe in the long run, some of these things should be tested just to see, but the middle of a pandemic, when things are hitting the fan, is not that time. You kind of got to go with what you know. If you can, have testing along, or testing for whatever solutions or policies, whatever. Like, if you can make that happen, great. But if not, you kind of have to have a standard, like, safest approach, to try to slow down something like that. So I guess the concept of free speech is extremely important. Like, I agree with that. Like, but at the same time, which has been, like you just mentioned and agreed on by our legal system, there are appropriate times to restrict free speech, because true free speech is anarchy. If you run into a crowded theater and yell fire when there is no fire, that creates chaos. People can get hurt or something like that. So that's a form of free speech that's restricted. If somebody comes and just says, like, maybe you say, oh, this person is using their business as an undercover operation to harm children, like, when there's no evidence to support that at all, that's sure, that's free speech. Like, if somebody were to say, well, that's not true, and they say, well, it doesn't matter if it's true. It's what matters is that I have the freedom to say it. It's like, well, no, that's not right. Like, that's defamation, causing real world harmful impacts that could destroy somebody's business for a lie. So there are times when free speech should be restricted. Those times that should happen is very rare, and it should only happen in those times where there's actual real world demonstrable harm that comes out of it, or promoting violence, saying, X specific individual, you need to go, society needs to go kill them. Like, yeah, that's dangerous. These are those extreme types of speech that should be limited.
Yeah, which, just to jut in real quick on that,
Yeah.
that's where I think, like, unless someone is directly calling for violence, I think that free speech, really, you can have all your crazy thoughts and conspiracies, because it's really dangerous to where, one person's conspiracy theory is another person's truth, and that's, you just don't want to legislate that. And in a way, sunlight is the best disinfectant of, like, if the crazy people are out there saying their stuff, people are gonna see it, and it's going to get crazier and crazier, and it's gonna kind of just die off, because people are gonna be like, this is crazy. But then when it sort of festers underground because it's being forced, there's like the persecution complex too, of they're trying to shut us down, and it just makes it grow stronger and stronger, and then it is probably more likely to result in violence if you would have just let it go on and people see it for what it is.
That's, yeah. No, I agree with that. So that's why I guess the line of where, from a really extreme, really inevitable, nothing but an inevitable bad outcome, where that line should be drawn between now or to the gray area of free speech that may be crazy conspiracy theories. Um, so that's where I guess specifically going back to the pandemic example of, well, what speech should be allowed for this if it's completely, if there's nothing to back it up, if it's potentially harmful, at minimum it would be the government's responsibility to say we have all this data that, evidence that shows otherwise. Please don't believe this, like you were saying, like just to sunlight, show that it's wrong. But then of course, then there's that brings in the morally debatable part. Well, where should, real world action begin versus the government just saying, promoting, like, here's what we know so far about this. Here's the best way we think to react versus, internet conspiracy theories that are maybe misleading people to even to their own deaths. That's also a big deal. That's a mistake you don't come back from. If you think, that there were so many stories of that during the pandemic of people who thought COVID wasn't a big deal, they got it, and then they were on their deathbed being like, man, I really wish I had listened to somebody. So it's kind of like that it is debatable. Again, this pandemic was global. It wasn't specific to America. It was, nobody had a playbook.
Yeah, well, maybe to use a more clear example, which I'm way more interested in personal examples that affect everybody as opposed to like the higher up things. But this is just one of the clearest ones of, before the 2020 election, I think it was the New York Times had posted that Hunter Biden laptop story that the powers that be forced, the White House and Biden administration forced it to be censored, and then it ended up being true, and that, like they say, seriously swayed the election because it's basically showing that at minimum Hunter Biden had a massive relationship with Ukraine, was getting tons of money for them, and it was very likely that Joe Biden was also a part of that, and that would have swayed people's opinions. And so you can say all the same things about Trump, like he's done all his election interference, but for pretty much every critique that people have of Trump, there's like an equivalent in my mind of the Democratic side of, they talked about Russia interference election, but it's like, but then you like undisputedly now, like no one debates that the FBI came in and shut down this very important story and censored it, and refused a major, not just like people on Facebook or whatever, but like the New York Times, censored them, and at the behest of the Democratic elite, and so I want to come back to free speech because this is important. But while we were on our little break, I thought, again, the more practical issues, because free speech is a practical issue, but I think the thing that affects people most of the day to day is like the cost of living. And that's a multifaceted issue because so many things affect it. But the single most thing that affected it was the Biden-Harris policies during the pandemic and shutting things down for as long as they did, and the largest transfer of wealth in any nation at any point of history from the poor to the rich that's ever happened and probably ever will happen, because they shut down all these smaller businesses and gave these massive corporations a leeway to run their businesses. And you can say, well, you got to be able to get your groceries and stuff, but then but why not from the local store? Like, why did they have to shut down, but yet Walmart and Amazon and all these places were given free reign to do their own thing? And that's a direct consequence of the Biden-Harris, phone fell, of their policies, and that affects everybody. And so I think the way the pandemic was handled by now, pretty much everyone agrees, was just like unforgivable. Like everything we did, it's like the playbook, you couldn't have done it any worse. And because it was kind of mixed between these two extremes, and because of that, a lot of people have suffered. And I know this is anecdote fallacy, but like the only person I personally know who died during the pandemic died by suicide because they were alone and isolated and depressed. And so I think that, the way it was just viewed as this one track thing of people are dying from an illness that is dangerous, totally, but just like taking that one thing and not seeing other issues, like, oh, humans also need other things besides to stay alive. And it's kind of like the environmentalism issue of people focus so much on carbon, what's your carbon footprint, when there's so many factors to energy and global warming and those types of things. So I think that's a specific thing that is, again, a serious issue with the Biden Harris, the way they did things, and still seem to have no regrets about the way they did it. And that's just mind blowing to me, because everything that resulted from that was bad. And I never understood the whole, people said the Hillary Clinton, the hard drive, like she had the things and she should go to jail because blah blah blah. And maybe it's because I don't know enough about it, but I just thought, like, I don't really get why that's such a big deal. But I don't understand how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are just walking around free in society and not in prison, locked in a cell, like throw away the key, just like Trump. Let's throw them all in prison. That would make me very happy. But that's kind of where, and because of that, I'll finish up. I've been on a little soapbox. I guess because of this and other things, I feel like maybe I would view your method of cutting off people as maybe too extreme, because it's not like Trump is running against Gandhi or even, I'll be fair, like even running against someone like Obama. Obama is someone who probably did some not great things, but seems like a fundamentally decent person. And if you had that versus Trump, it'd be like, there's not really a massive choice. But here you have two objectively awful people who have not just done awful things in theory, but like have actually done awful things and harmed a lot of people and want to perpetuate that harm.
Well, I guess I would disagree with that. I mean, do you think during the pandemic era of Biden and when Harris was VP, do you think that was their intent behind the scenes, that their intent was, we want to shut down small businesses, we want to harm citizens, so let's do this plan? Do you think that was initially from the onset their ulterior motives?
No, I mean, I don't think most people do evil things on purpose. It's because they think it's right. But it goes back to your point with voting of, like, it doesn't really matter what the intention was if it has this result. And ultimately they were just looking like so nearsighted, because these are things that a lot of people were saying summer of 2020, were saying we should be doing it this way, like we should be quarantining the elderly, people with these issues, and not keeping the economy shut down, not keeping young people from being in school, because who knows what sort of, like, we already have the mental health crisis and the phone and social media crisis with children, and then exacerbating that, like, who knows what's gonna rise out of those kids in years to come. And you feel so bad for them, of like, these were kids that were deprived social engagement, which is so critical for development. And sure, I guess it depends on where you were in the US, and it wasn't quite like other countries where there were a lot more arrests. And again, it's always it's like UK, Australia, Canada, they're this weird form of leftist totalitarian that I find really concerning, and a lot of that's encroaching on the US. And I'm like, I don't want that here. Like, just let people do what they want. Like, why can't people just leave others alone and live their own lives?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the fundamental, like, live and let live should be a thing. But then again, that's again, gray area with something like a pandemic. When does, me spreading germs, which could affect somebody else, like, where's the line? Like, how long, since we know that, like, again, this was I guess the irony is that the Democratic Party during the election took a highly conservative approach to this, highly cautious, which is ironic, because then conservatives wanted a highly liberal approach, like, don't shut me down, don't make me wear masks, I don't, this sort of stuff. Like, it was kind of a weird, like you said earlier, some things like seem to flip-flop between sides. But yeah, I mean, in all of that, like, these are just there was no malicious intent, there was no playbook, these were just natural consequences.
There's like criminal negligence. in my mind. Because again,
The
it's not
what type
like
of negligence?
just criminal negligence. If it's not like everybody was in the same boat, and then we looked back, years later and thought, oh, like none of us saw that, like we should have done it this way. It was, half the country, or it's not really, you couldn't really divide it into half, but millions upon millions of people, including, there's the Great Barrington Declaration of like, I want to say it was like, I'm probably going to get the number wrong, but something like 15,000 doctors who signed this saying like everything we're doing about COVID does not make sense. And it's treating this as this like one-dimensional thing, and it's going to cause all these problems. And that was, a lot of these things were very early on, and no one was listening to just common sense. Like common sense would have told us, how many people under the age of 40 were dying of COVID, by September of 2020. And yet still they're being forced to shut down their businesses, not go to school, all these things that cause these mass issues in society. So that's where it's like, in my mind,
Well, yeah,
you can say there wasn't malicious intent, but like they just, I don't know, were just criminally stupid and caused a lot of harm.
I mean, I just don't see it as that extreme, I guess. There's nothing, I don't think any criminal anything, like, sure, you could say in hindsight these things could be handled better. Governments always move slow. That's an unfortunate thing, even for good policies. Like, government just moves slow most of the time. But yeah, no, I mean, with stuff like, even like you said, inflation, like that, the pandemic, but it wasn't, that has since resolved. Something like inflation, they've shown statistical data that half of all inflation is simply from corporations collectively raising their prices for higher profits, rather than anything directly with supply chain issues or government things. That's just I guess a small detail. Again, does create this problem for society.
Yeah, and a lot of that is
it's
because they have,
I don't know.
like, given so much
I just don't see the criminal aspect.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's because they were given so much like power during the pandemic by the Biden-Harris administration, where there was this wild jump in the, I forget, it's been a long time since I've seen the charts, but it shows like, and then 2021, it's like, bam, like these corporations just exploded because they basically had a monopoly on the market. And that's, Trump, everything he says, he's like, everything I do is the best, and everything this other person does is the worst, and they're the worst at this. But I think it really will, like, as we look back in history, the Biden-Harris administration of 2020 to 2024 will be viewed as like the worst presidential administration in American history, unless potentially one of them, or 2024 to 2028, we could have some issues there. But so far, like, this has caused like the most real world harm in my lifetime, at least, just based on like criminally stupid policy. And I guess I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that's because we go into the details of all that. But another Trump question was, would you say that like, what do you think about the fact that Elon Musk and RFK Jr., who are two of the country's most prominent liberals, have joined forces with Trump? What do you think that says about the Democratic establishment?
Well, I think I don't know if it really says too much there, because I guess there's been seems to be a big swing. Well, not with RFK. He was always seemed to try to play the middle ground, be neutral. He reached out to, at the end of his campaigning, or he reached out to both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, saying, "Hey, please add me to your administration." The Democratic Party rejected him. Trump did accept him. So he was more definitely wanted to play middle ground. But then someone like Elon Musk, who was basically he was, originally viewed, very left wing, probably was a lot of left wing policies, and now he's very much highly swung to the right. So that's not necessarily anything. I don't think it says anything about the political system. It's just about his personal beliefs have highly shifted, which, all right, people's beliefs change over time. So I don't think
I'd say the problem is that Elon Musk's, he's kind of like Bill Maher would be a good example. Bill Maher always says, like, I haven't changed a bit. Like, it's the Democratic Party that's changed. And Elon Musk would, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find Elon Musk, say 15 years ago, would someone who's a pot smoking, gay marriage supporting, like believes in social programs, is leading in the green movement, like they wouldn't be viewed as far right or conservative. It's that the party has shifted so much. And a lot of what's driven someone like Musk and even RFK to where they're at is a lot of these free speech issues and the crackdown, because the main reason that RFK even had to drop out of the presidential races was because the Democratic Party won't let anyone else run, and sued him out of the race basically, and where he couldn't pay the bills and was saying, I'm not going to keep taking money from Americans to fight all these legal battles, and which is on top of having, for the first time, a presidential candidate who doesn't have a single American vote, cast for them in any primaries or anything, because they were just nominated by basically the giant tech companies and military industrial complex. And that just seems, again, this is why I've never paid much attention to politics, because it's all just a joke and everyone's awful. And that's why I think that, I guess what I was thinking, or let's go back to personal stuff. So what do you think about, I can see our mom would probably say, oh, he's going to cut people out who vote for Trump. Like, I don't want to cause problems. I'm just not going to vote or something. I have a harder time seeing our dad. It's not like he's, gung ho Trump, but I just don't see him reacting well to being forced to do or not do something. And, and that could cause real world issues. And do you think a better, or I was just going to throw out the idea, could the end resolution say that I will not interact with anybody until you sit down and have set your time, like extended conversation about these issues? Because how will things in your mind get better, not just with family, but with society, if you're, basically cutting off half of America? It's a long-winded question, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, that's true. Like, obviously, if I cut people off, like, there wouldn't be that opportunity for interaction. But at the same time, all of those people have shown absolutely zero interest in interaction over the last 10 years. It's not like this is just like within a month, like I'm just jumping to do something. This is 10 years of people being uninterested in, politics. Like, our parents have even said they don't pay that much attention to what goes on. Naturally, this is just kind of, nobody's really needed to in the past so much. I guess it's just more of you kind of have to draw a line in the sand at some point. You can't continuously, going back to my analogy, a one-time oopsie of leaving a firearm available for a kid, like, that's a big deal. Hopefully somebody learns. If they continuously do that, that's a big problem. If they don't learn from that, and so it's the same principle here. If somebody's repeatedly seeing, or I guess probably not seeing because they're not paying attention to what's going on, have no interest in paying attention for themselves, have no interest in talking about politics, no interest in interaction, what interest should I have in keeping them around when their ideology is not just different, it's not a different ideology, it's a dangerous ideology. So that's, but again, it's kind of more to the point of, what was
can
that?
you always equate the ideology with the vote? Because there's still, I get your analogy, like you're saying, of like, oh, that has real world consequences. But if a person's not even actively purveying that ideology in society, they just, there's like, I'm just voting for this guy. Like, doesn't that seem like a different thing?
I mean, again, it is a different mindset, yes, but the inconsequences are the same. It's another analogy I used in the paper was, somebody who's drunk driving. Like, are they a bad person? No. But the fact that they have chosen to drink and drive creates a dangerous situation, where it could harm other people, and they shouldn't, we shouldn't just, if they do get into an accident and hurt themselves or others, then saying, oh my God, I just didn't know that drinking and driving was a problem. Like, I shouldn't be held responsible for these, the consequences. It's like, well, no, I mean, that's, you should, like, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It just means that their actions have caused real world harm that's worth, they have to be held accountable for that. And so that's what this is doing when I'm doing it. Sure. And like if somebody wants to, afterwards, realizes, what I would say comes to their senses and realizes, yeah, Trump is really bad. I shouldn't have voted for him. I'm like, great, like good, like we're all good. But somebody who just continuously has no interest in seeing how dangerous their own ideology is, what they promote, without even indirectly, this is kind of obviously voting, like you said, seems inconsequential. It seems very distant. You're just signing and putting, marking a piece of paper, putting it in a Dropbox, or giving it to the voter people, whatever, and then that's it. It just seems so distant, so far away, how the process works. But it has very real world consequences. And so if at some point somebody realizes that they've made a mistake, sure, come back, talk about it and all that. But if they've had no interest over 10 years, like how should I expect that they're going to have interest and wake up,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, which to give fair credence of it does, the fact that, you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics just seems like the dumbest thing you could possibly encourage in a society. And because these are the foundational, values, and if you're not supposed to talk about them, then how are you supposed to fix anything? And so I get the passion and the people. It's always bothered me that both you and I think Daniel, our other brother, we think a lot about life and don't understand why other people don't think much about life. And it's and I remember having a conversation at a family get together with an undisclosed family member, and them saying, "Man, you just think too much." And I'm like, "This is like I'm barely like this is just basic logic. I'm not even deep in the weeds in something. Just like if people gave, and I feel like I sometimes overcompensate if I can get, not as much in recent years. I think I've balanced out some more, but like I used to get really into things because like, how are people not addressing this issue, the giant elephant in the room, and just pretending like everything's okay?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think this goes back to just people have busy lives. People have families, they have work, they have things to do. Like, even though things like religion and politics are very foundational things, that people tend to just not put forth the effort in thinking about them. They kind of default to what they were, raised with, kind of, I guess, emotionally based perceptions of issues or something like that, without thinking, sitting down and thinking about, okay, here's all the data, here's different courses of action that could be taken, here's all this sort of stuff, like thinking, thoroughly thinking through an issue and then coming to a conclusion based on it. It's more of a, an emotionally based belief about something, which is natural. That is literally how we were wired. It's a survival mechanism. But the point is getting past that, and actually putting time and effort into thinking about what you believe and why you believe it. And then of course that naturally causes a cascade of, the belief systems are a web. One little point, intersection, if that changes, that could affect other things, like forming a new connection or breaking a connection between beliefs. And so then it causes a cascade of thinking about other stuff, and all this stuff takes time, and people just don't have time to think through what they believe or why they believe it.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned wanting to talk about Christian nationalism, which is sort of the convergence of religion and politics. So why don't you just share what you were thinking, or any questions?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of I would say that's kind of the biggest issue. That's the core, the underlying, that's all the division we've seen building over decades is based on that. Like, and absolutely, like, Christianity is not dangerous, and being a patriot is not dangerous. But as we've seen through multiple cultures throughout time, when people start to merge religion and government, and like people are using the government to promote their religion and using their religion to promote their political ideology specific to their religion, stuff like this, it's always a dangerous. Everybody loses except for the few people who are in power. And it's a very dangerous situation. And we've seen this, playing out, like, most recently, the superintendent of Oklahoma is trying to force every school in the state to have a Bible in the classroom. And the way that they've written it is that literally cannot have any Bible except for the Bible which Trump personally profits from. So that's, I mean, right there, just, religion and politics coming together, grifting. It's, we see stuff like this happening that's very dangerous.
I don't, I highly doubt this is what Oklahoma is doing, but I'm pretty sure Richard Dawkins said the same thing, but that religion really should be taught in school, like major world religions.
Oh, no, I agree. There should be a religion class for sure that people should learn about. But when it gets to promoting a single religion, that's a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is a change that should happen, is that we shouldn't be as culturally illiterate on major world religions, including Christianity, since it plays such a huge role in America's history. And then it's always, but that, like you're saying, it gets real mixed and muddled together. What would you
Oh, sorry. I was just going to commenting on that. Like that has, within the last week, basically is what come out. Like the superintendent himself has outlined this stuff. He put it in writing in a proposal for the state. Basically the criteria of it, the only Bible in the world that would fit the criteria is specifically Donald Trump's Bible that he came out with like a month ago or whenever it was. So it's worth looking into, but that is, I feel like, a fair representation of what's happening there.
Yeah.
Similar to, like, I think it was, I don't know, Louisiana or something like that, trying to maybe post the 10 Commandments or stuff like this. Like, and sure, lots of this stuff is perceived as important, like Christian nationalism. You perceive Christianity being the foundation of the country, but it's not. This is a secular country specifically meant to not endorse or put down any one religion. Everybody's supposed to be on equal footing, so even though it's been heavily influenced, obviously, by the past, the population has been majority Christian, stuff like that. The country itself is a secular country, meant for freedom for all, which makes sense when looking at, because it's a melting pot, like all different beliefs coming together. And so yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just, barely asked this at family vacation last year, because we talk about all kinds of things on family vacation, but we never really got into it. But more and more, I sort of understand. I, would never support like Christian nationalism, and especially like evangelical Christian nationalism. But I do think there's not nearly as black and white a line between religion and politics as we've been led to believe in the West. And so, what would you say in your mind? How would you distinguish between religion and politics?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true. Like, obviously, everybody has political beliefs, and everybody has, some sort of religious belief, or even if it's a non-belief in that, whatever. Like, as as a person, everybody's got that. So obviously, when people are, Congress members, president, whoever, they're going to have both of those beliefs. Like, it's inevitable. It is kind of mixed together internally for a person's worldview. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess the danger is specifically when the government starts to advantage or disadvantage certain religions, by policies that they enact, by law. So I mean, as long as that's not happening, like, yes, of course, people may have political beliefs that have some religious undergirding, but as long as they're not pointing out and saying, here's specifically, here's the chapter of the Bible that says this thing is wrong, so we need to make this wrong. It's like, well, no, you need to shift to philosophical grounds. Like, if an issue is, should be done or should not be done, you need to have, philosophical grounding for it, real world data, evidence, stuff like that. And sure, maybe you can build a case that's based on your pre-held beliefs, maybe not. But the thing is that it just should not, the government should not, protect or disadvantage a specific religion. All religions should just be on equal footing.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is that I have a harder and harder time distinguishing between political views and religious views, because I think there's this idea, because it sort of comes to the root of, like, what is our vision as a country or a society. Like we don't really, it used to be, America, and there's a big ethos of the founding fathers and where we came from. And that's sort of very similar to a religion too. If you have this founding narrative and these stories and these heroes that give you your values and what direction you're going to go as a people group. And even the word religion means, like, it comes from ligament and like to bind together, and then to do again. So religious is like the things you do and repeat, like the rituals and ceremonies that can be, political or just cultural, that sort of infuse a type of value in a people group. And so I think not to I totally get what people say when they say, like, "Oh, I'm not religious," but in my mind, that's technically impossible. Like everyone has a core set of values that's being reinforced somehow by their community, whether that's their small friend group or whether that's a large mega church or whether it's, Islam or Hinduism or whatever. And there's so many political values that can't really be separated from your moral values, and including things relating to like charity and like I think if I just thought of this the other day, but I I think when people have a um very closed atheistic view. I have a long history of criticizing religion, so that can be its own topic. But as far as my critique of atheism, when it's just like atheism in the sense that there is no inherent meaning in the universe, that just seems like a really dumb idea. Because how do you have like a secular or atheistic? How do you rally around everything if everyone's opinions are just equally valid? Because it's just, well, you happen to view things that way and I view things this way, and eventually there's going to be a majority who holds this view and they're going to sort of dominate this other view, and the quote unquote non-religious in America get progressively more religious. And there's a whole book by a guy named John McWhorter, who's a black liberal atheist himself, but he says that, yeah, I did not expect to see religion growing in the, he kind of talks about wokeness, which I know is sort of a catchphrase and is like usually what Fox News and places like that are talking about, like everything's woke. And I think that I totally agree with lots of woke principles, but there's a lot of things that I'm like, yeah, this is religious. Like this is not going based off of common sense or values. And that's, I don't know, that's not even a question, but I'm just throwing out some thoughts. This is something I'm still forming, and I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I feel like that's just like I said, that's the foundational thing. Like, yeah, there's definitely a difference between religious beliefs and beliefs that are deeply held. Like religious beliefs are a subcategory of that. There's philosophical beliefs that are also deeply held, that you could say are held to a religious type extent, but they are not religious beliefs. They're just deeply held beliefs. But yeah, I mean, everybody's going to have those beliefs that are intertwined, bounce off each other. Like I said earlier, like our belief system is a web. Nothing is just independent. The religion and politics or philosophy or economics, whatever, all these things are tied together. They all play into each other. But again, with the Christian nationalism, which we have seen a rise of in the country recently, which is a natural outcome of fear. Things are changing. Like that's just there was a great book I read about. It was a while ago. I forget what the name was, but it was some lady. She was a psychologist who basically studied cults, from just personal cults, people getting caught up in religious ones, political ones, whatever, and like just seeing how the world works, and basically at times of change is when historically, regardless of culture or time period, that's when you see the greatest emotional reactions to stuff. People joining dangerous movements is in times of great change, because they're trying to, they've perceived their world as disappearing as they knew it and changing. So they're wanting to basically kind of fight for what they knew, because obviously change can be difficult, change can be scary, it's unknown, stuff like this. And so right now, this is the time in human history, like all of human history, where there has been the most and the most extreme, greatest amount of changes over the shortest amount of time. Like technological events, like things are just ramping so fast. There's been so much change that it's very scary. So it's completely not a surprise that somebody is like Donald Trump would come to a position of power. People of generations past are perceiving their world as fading away. It's scary. He's exploiting their fear, their ignorance of issues to maintain and maintain power, and which again plays off with the whole him melding, seeing religion as a tool. He's obviously, like the Bible says, somebody by their fruits. He clearly does not really have hardly any fruits that would indicate that he's a Christian. But he does realize that it's exploiting religion is very useful. It's a sinister use of religion. And then of course, because he's verbally promoting that, even if he doesn't truly believe it, he catches people.
A quick side note. Since 2020, 2021, this wasn't necessarily related to the pandemic, but just my relationship with Christianity has gotten a lot muddier. But the primary reason I didn't vote for Trump in 2020 was because, historically speaking, he is literally the Antichrist. I don't mean like the way that most people view that is very Southern evangelical, but historically the Antichrist is, there's many Antichrists, and it's someone who usurps political power through, force and violence to do awful things in the name of Jesus. And so I was like, yeah, I can't, like, voting for Trump is literally taking the mark of the beast. Like, that's what that means, and what it meant in the first century with, pinching incense to Rome and to Caesar and all of that. So it just was very ironic. There are several issues that are in politics inherently that I think are moral, or just like value. Moral makes it seem like, this right or wrong thing. Maybe one, I hate to use this example because it's like this bashing point that I think is way overemphasized, and don't want to like bash gay people or trans people, but people like the trans women and or trans men in women's sports, like that's a religious, like if you believe in that, that's a religious belief. It's not because of science or because of whatever. And same with, say, abortion. I get the argument of where people say, well, if you believe this is a life, then it makes sense that you would fight tooth and nail to defend that because that's a moral religious value. And that's not really the way that I see it, but like, I get it. And it makes a lot of sense to me. Or even some of the free speech stuff, like these are matters of like, what do you ultimately value? Western society really values individuality and individual expression. A lot of Eastern cultures tend to more value, group conformity, and both have their good and bad. But those are sort of, again, religious values in the sense that what sort of things are we going to repeat and ingrain in our culture to create a society? And I don't see how they can be separated.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe using the term religious is maybe the issue. Like,
yeah,
I feel like the term religious should only be used when we're talking about a specific organized religion or dealing with supernatural events. That's kind of, in my view, when the term religion should be used versus maybe like a deeply held belief or values, something like that. That's more philosophical for that. So, yeah, so it's like I said, everybody's got deeply held beliefs. Society is going to gravitate towards implementing laws where the majority of people, basically in a democracy where the majority elects people who also believe the same things they do, then the majority of the government is those beliefs, which then gets enacted into law. Like this, it's all just kind of part of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how the world works. So it can't really be separated. It just has to, as much as possible, be made fair. Not, finding the balance for free speech of not allowing chaos or violence or defamation, while also letting people speak freely, finding the line for that, or for these other moral issues, like where having a philosophical grounding, like for transgenders in sports, like finding the what's fair. Like that's a whole conversation in itself, like of why why are sports divided to begin with between men and women, and when is it, all these, it's a very complex issue.
But do you see what I mean? That like you can't even have a conversation about what's fair unless you have like an agreed upon rooting vision of like what's life, what's meaning. And so like since everything flows from that, I don't really see like when people there, it just seems like there's always going to be a dominant we can call it ideology instead of religion, but in my mind they've become more and more the same thing. Like you can have Christian nationalism is the same thing as MAGA, is the same thing as Islamic Caliphate, is the same thing as China, with where you have the supreme leader, is the same thing as Kim Jong Un, where you have this all this kind of stuff, which also is the same thing as a government, say in America, that's run by like liberal valued people. Like that's also a religion. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just think that is an ideology. We'll use the word ideology, and there's always going to be a dominant ideology. So the rise in Christian nationalism makes a lot of sense to me because that's an ideology, just like there's a liberal ideology that's prevalent in America, which that's the word people a lot of these conversations are hard because words change meaning. Like liberalism used to mean a lot of things, and now it's like the Democratic Party. Yeah. No,
I mean I guess I agree with a lot. Like, yes, there's always going to be a dominant ideology. That's just the way the world works. It's just finding a way to basically the core value that in America is the most individualistic culture that's ever existed, and that does make sense based on its development of it's not a people group who founded a country. It's a ton of different people coming from across the world coming together. So that does, by its very nature, kind of create a less, than highly group cultures that are always, the more, I guess just other cultures that are highly group oriented versus the individualistic culture of America. That is going to create a greater, I don't know if greater division or less sense of unity, but to some degree. But the core thing that we should all do as a country is basically the live and let live. Like, so long as somebody is not doing something that is actively harming somebody else, like obviously, that just kind of let them do it, let them live their life, you live your own life, understanding that at a core level we're all human beings trying to make our way in the world. There's different ways to make our ways in the world, and that's perfectly fine. We can all coexist together unless there is an ideology that simply just undercuts the concept of coexistence, which is something like authoritarianism and tools of fascism to make that happen. So yeah, you can't delineate out beliefs. It's not going to, everything plays into one another. It's all going to affect it. It's just having the basic foundational mindset of live and let live on a legal perspective, having laws that are fairly and equally applied to everyone so that nobody is advantaged or disadvantaged. That's kind of I guess the root value that we should all strive towards. And I mean, of course, that's not going to, that doesn't put anybody down. Like you said, the rise of Christian nationalism is expected. Like this is the last several decades, especially, is kind of where it's been growing. I mean, even back into like 80s, 90s is where it started with the kind of evangelical movements that have gone from behind the scenes to now public. The people who are elected to positions of power now promoting the Christian nationalist ideology. So it's expected, like, but it's also that specifically is dangerous. And of course there's got to be ways to protect those free speech so that people can live and let live. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, this could be its own conversation sometime, because I think it's a very broad topic that literally encompasses, meaning and purpose and why we all do anything. And because I just see more and more that the idea of a secular state is sort of a failed experiment, and of like if by secular you mean like we all have different values, like we'll just agree to live and let live. Like there's always going to be something that eventually, you know, like something gets bloated because of some issue in society, and a particular ideology comes in to fill that and takes dominance. Like there's always going to be a dominant ideology, and you can't just pretend like, well, we won't have a dominant ideology. Like we'll let everybody be equal. Like that's probably not ever going to happen. And just like Donald Trump is to bring it full circle, you can say like Donald Trump is a religious nutcase who should not be president and is a threat to democracy. I would also say that Kamala Harris is a religious nutcase who should not be president and is a threat to democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I guess you view them as, obviously Trump is worse, but similar. I have not seen anything that it would put them in the same ballpark. It's not the same, like policy disagreements, maybe, handling certain issues better, sure, but it doesn't undercut the foundational idea of that there should not basically anarchy and religious fascism. There's not that in the Democratic Party or any other party at this point. It's only MAGA.
Well, no, but I mean, do you see what I was saying about like the Democratic Party won't let anyone else run? Like that's fascism. Like that's a threat to democracy. Like that's for all the Trump criticisms, which are valid. I think there's a Democrat equivalent, and that's what I take issue with, I guess, and where we would differ a lot is that I totally get that, because if it's hard to assess things, like weigh things together. But if I'm just looking from afar, like my concerns about Donald Trump being president and Kamala Harris being president are like pretty equal. And like I think there's a lot of bad things that could happen with both. And yeah, I still don't know. I mean, I know I'm not going to vote for either of them. I think in the US and in Arkansas, you can still vote for RFK just as a like just to say like, oh, this is what I wanted to do, even though it's not like an actual candidate who's gonna be president or anything. Because ideally there would be more parties over time instead of a two-party system where you get crazy A or crazy B.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I still just, I mean, I guess if you're wanting to get into more details of explaining, like, I would maybe disagree with, unless you explain more about the concept of maybe the Democrat Party won't let other people run. I feel like that's not necessarily the case. It's just the special circumstances surrounding kind of where we're at right now, more so than anything else.
I'm sure if the like Republican Party was in a similar situation, they'd be the same. Like that's why there's a two-party system. You have these two massive parties who sort of control what's going on and make sure that nothing else interferes with that system. And so I don't think it's exclusive just this go round. There's been, so many egregious breaches of just I guess I could send you a bunch of just listening. There's probably a video somewhere of just RFK specifically talking about his experience running as a Democrat and how wild that is, and how many, it's politics are always dirty, but it's just kind of mind-boggling that another prime example of the Biden administration didn't give him Secret Service until after Trump's assassination attempt. And even the head of the Secret Service was like, what the hell? Like this guy has two family members who's been killed. And the Biden administration still said, no, like, I guess you shouldn't look into people's motives of why they do things, but the main thing that they knew was like that was aside from legal lawsuits, that was RFK's biggest expense was security, because he wasn't being provided security, Secret Service, even though he was supposed to constitutionally, because the administration knew that, well, if we're not covering it, he's gonna have to pay for it, and that's gonna be less money for his campaign. It's like, this is politics.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess there's a whole bunch of detailed things we can get into it maybe another time, since we've been chatting for a while now. But just I guess the main thing is that I do not see the same threat to democracy from any party right now except for MAGA, the Republican Party. That is the only solidly not in gray area threat to democracy, whereas maybe this other stuff is gray area and debatable.
Yeah, and I think would obviously disagree with that, as we've been talking about, but I think that it's I do think that's, what's the word? Not necessarily narrow-minded, but there's so many different converging people who have serious concerns about the liberalism in America, ranging from, Richard Dawkins to religious people to, I wrote down a list somewhere of like, how did all these people get on the same, team, sort of like they have nothing in common and if anything, like they're almost antagonistic towards each other, but yet they have this common concern about where liberalism is going in America, mostly because the conversation on where the right is going on in America is pretty obvious to a lot of people, like the threats and dangers, but there's a lesser prominence of talking about those other points. I don't know if I have a whole lot more. Do you have any other particular things you wanted to cover?
No, I mean, like, I guess overall, like I've said, like I'm not trying to necessarily convince people of, kind of cornering them into a specific course of action, a specific ideology. It's just pointing people away from one. So sure, like if people don't want to vote for Kamala or whoever else, like I don't care. That's not an issue. If they can dislike them, not vote for them, perfectly fine. But if at the same time as that they don't realize the extreme danger that Donald Trump is promoting, then that's the core of the issue. Yeah. So if people completely realize that he's a threat and they would not vote for him under any circumstance, but still dislike other people or whatever, like that's great. We're cool. We can still be friends. But just not recognizing, I feel like the last comparison would maybe be comparing the situation to the movie Don't Look Up. For those, I guess there's spoilers for people who have maybe not seen it, but the premise is that, scientists, people who are experts in their field, find through evidence, real world, that there's an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth, and it's big enough to be basically in the planet. And then throughout the course of the movie, society just doesn't really take it seriously, doesn't understand the threat. And so I feel like that's kind of what's happened politically right now. And sure, like I know that you would feel like maybe the Democratic Party is in the same category. I would disagree, but at least we both agree that the Trump administration, Trump himself, is firmly in that category. And I would hope that everybody else is at least able to recognize that. And people who aren't able to recognize that, I would say, are signs of just a very kind of a severe tribalistic bias. People who don't pay attention or who don't care, and don't realize the consequences of what will happen, even if just out of lackadaisical voting for concept of other policies they promote. The fact that underlying problems are not deal breakers with Trump, that's kind of a serious revelation about their own character and what they're willing to put up with, to be extreme, that they don't care if their fellow citizens are arrested or assassinated. They don't care if the government is overthrown and we have a president for life who is not held accountable by the law. Like, these core underlying big issues. So that's kind of just my message of why I was doing what I'm doing, just to help. I mean, more, like I said, at this point, lots of people are probably going to vote one way or the other. Like there's not many people left in the middle who don't know how they're going to vote. So this is mostly just an announcement for the video that I previously made, and I guess explanation here, announcement of why I'm doing what I'm doing. If you change your mind and it makes a difference, great. If not, then here's why I'm justified in just kind of cutting things off with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only other thing that I wanted to circle back to and get some of your thoughts on, because this is because we can have another conversation about this, but I just wanted to get some more initial thoughts of
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in between a rock and a hard place, because it seems like, yeah, we both grew up very, evangelical, and we kind of pieced out of that. And you left in, I don't know, 2008 or something.
I mean, moved up here or just as far as
No, just
changing
left like
beliefs?
evangelicalism. And
Yeah, it was probably around there, 2010. So yeah, but college time range, yeah, 2008 to 2010-ish.
yeah, and same for me, like 2013 or something was when I sort of pieced out of evangelicalism and experimented with different forms of Christianity. But the thing they seem to all have in common is they don't really work. And I'm just an intensely practical person.
Me
And
too.
I've also seen that, like, a sort of aimless secularism also doesn't seem to work. And so, like, what's going to be our vision moving into the future of, like, what um I think you sort of have to have a story, not like a literal, even like the founding father story. Like, you found your nation, these are the values you stand for, like, this is who we are as a people, these are the values we believe in the most fundamental sense. Like, I feel like we're all very distant from that because not many people are patriots anymore for obvious reasons. But there's times where I think, like, it'd be great if I could be a patriot. If you had a country that you, like, really believed in the founding principles and the values. And so yeah, do you have any, I know it's just like, oh, here's a final question, throw out some thoughts, but, like, do you have any vision or idea of where we can or should go?
I mean, I feel like I touched on it a little bit, but it basically comes down to the fundamental aspect of just recognizing, you know, everybody around me in society is a fellow human being. We're all trying to make our ways in the world. I would disagree with you on the it's not necessarily aimless secularism. It's just a fair, equal society that can work. And yes, there will always be larger groups that hold certain ideologies that will get promoted more in society, so long as if that so long as that ideology doesn't undermine other people's ways to live, like not taking away a woman's rights to go out in public or vote or own land or have a job, stuff like that. Like, even if a large group of people held that belief, then that should never then become law. There should be the foundational aspects of, like, the Constitution, stuff like this legal system that protects, like, say, hey, these people, everybody deserves equal rights, whether you're a woman or non-white or disabled, whatever. um, which all those things are protected classes because we've seen in the past that society has taken away rights from those groups. So we've kind of put in writing that we should protect them, which should have never been needed in the first place, if people had that attitude. But socially, that was a thing of rights being taken away. So then we had to turn to the legal system to guarantee people those rights. So as long as these fundamental rights are just guaranteed in the law, and you understand that this is, just a fellow human being trying to make their way in the world, I feel like that is a way to build a society, and people with differences can coexist. And that it shouldn't be any kind of a problem. Like, there will always be societal problems, but that fundamental aspect, fundamental thought of how to build a society should work just fine.
Mm, yeah,
Yep.
fair enough. Well, any last little bow ties you want to throw out?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, we've covered a lot, and, like, again, a different time, if there's other topics, different types of videos you want to talk about, we can do that.
Yeah, and I
But
can put the link to your video that you made down below. And yeah, I was just hoping, I thought this would be fun to talk through and record. For one, just to actually talk about it, but then to just try to exemplify civil conversation about disagreements. And because,
yeah,
like, how else do we move forward as a society unless we can talk about things that are contentious? And without it, descending into name calling and
no, and that's important. And I think I guess the biggest point is this sort of stuff takes practice. Obviously we're emotionally wired, and things like politics and religion are the foundational, like the most emotional thing that kind of grounds who we are, so it can be feel like an attack, so we defend, go into fight or flight mode, whatever. But it takes practice. Like, people have conversations, people have to be interested in the first place of discussing these sort of difficult topics, and over time keep in mind of how to appropriately approach it without, like you said, without just becoming a the name calling fest and just descending into just nothing productive. So I think that's people need to take greater issue, like you said earlier, like people thinking about these things, taking time in their lives to whatever issue it is, like thinking through, why do I believe this? How does this affect other beliefs? Like it takes a lot of effort, years worth of effort, and it's slow and it takes time, but it's worth it in the end because it's needed, instead of having a society full of people who just are kind of mindlessly going along for these important things like who you elect in society, not realizing the consequences of it. So just having a greater interest in wanting to do that, taking or making the time to do it, and then practicing to know how to appropriately approach and have productive conversations. That would just make everything better.
Yep. Well, thanks for chatting, and we'll see what happens in 30 days.
We will see. And man, what a time to be alive.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. I'll see ya.
All right. Have a good week.